Hello again guys, and welcome back to a very special episode, as this week is the first of our retro road trips. And for the first port of call, we're off to Retro Replay, the local gaming bar, arcade and lounge, and you are in for a treat if you are a fan of traditional and old school arcade machines, as this place has everything. This was a perfect night out with me, a few of my friends and especially the wife, and I'm going to take you along for the ride with us. Retro Replay is not your standard arcade. You do not have to pay for each individual machine. You simply pay for a wristband and you are good all day to play as many arcade games as your heart desires. And trust me, there is a massive selection of machines here. What I'm going to do is have a walk through, show you some of the machines. I'm going to go more in depth into some of the machines they have, but trust me, if you love arcade machines, you are in for a hell of a ride. Retro Replay is in the heart of Norwich in the Castle Quarter Mall. It has just recently moved premises to this larger unit, and you can see why, as this place is absolutely stacked with arcade machines. We have kind of cabinets, we have the old school arcades, we have driving machines, we have shooting machines, and we have some strange things. But this place is huge. I'm glad we had a good couple of hours on a Saturday night to go through, as there is a lot to take in. I'm not going to be able to play every single machine just because I think my wrists and fingers would have given up by the end of it. But I am just giving you an idea of how big this place is. It is well worth a visit, and it is worth noting as well, they are always adding new machines. So if there's something that isn't there now, you never know, it could be along the way. But I'm just going to go through and show you the whole of the arcade. So as you can see, there is a massive range of machines, and this is a large place, and it is absolutely definitely when you're in there, it is so good to hear all that retro and 8-bit music. They even have the old school sit down arcade tables. But now we're going to jump into some closer look at some of the machines. One of the first machines we jumped on as soon as we got there was this Star Wars Trilogy arcade cab. This was a machine I used to play back in our local bowling alley all the time, and I am a massive fan of this game. I don't actually think this one's aged too badly, as it was always a really good kind of on-rail shooting game. It also has some really strange lightsaber sections, but it just kind of takes the three films for the original trilogy and adds in all the iconic moments into the arcade machine. As you can see here, we are now attacking the Death Star. This is definitely one of the biggest machines they have at Retro Replay. It is huge. As you can see here, my friend James is playing. You've got two joysticks to control your character or ship in the game, and it is a massive screen. But this is what arcades do best. They really capture the iconic moments of the Star Wars films. As you can see, at the end of A New Hope here, we are going to finally destroy the Death Star. This was a pretty tense moment, as we had already tried this bit and missed, but this time you can see we were successful. After destroying the Death Star, it was on to destroy more bad guys in Thunderblade, the classic Sega arcade helicopter simulator game. This one's really cool. It's an upright cab and it has a really good joystick as you kind of fly up, down, left and right. It's a really cool, simple premise for a catchy little arcade game. From one classic Sega arcade machine to another, and that is with Outrun, undoubtedly one of my favourite 8-bit era racing games. And I feel this is the best way to play it, upright, using steering wheel on the pedals in the arcade. But I don't know if it's just me, this seemed really difficult. I know that Outrun was never an easy game, but this one seemed like overly hard. I think I got to like maybe the first and second checkpoint, but there was no way I was going to get through this one, not even with the infinite credits. But this is one of the things about arcade games from that kind of era. They were hard and they were there to vacuum the money out of your pocket, but with Retro Replay that doesn't matter. So as soon as we'd failed at this one, I was on to the next machine. We are carrying on the Sega theme with something I was really not expecting to see, and that was Sonic the Hedgehog on an arcade machine. So I haven't exactly got the greatest knowledge of arcade machines, so I don't know if this was kind of a ROM that was loaded onto the machine, but it definitely felt like playing Sonic the Hedgehog back on the Mega Drive. It was a bit weird not using a controller and using kind of the arcade sticks, which did make it a lot more difficult. But it was really cool to play kind of this classic Sega game in a different fashion, even though the controls did make this game feel so much harder, but it was really, really cool. Even though we did kind of get stuck onto this one a little while because we were kind of determined that we should be able to finish this game in one sitting, but its controls just made it that a little bit more difficult. There's also quite a few oddities here. This is Secret Agents. This was a really odd game. At first you're parachuting, shooting people, then you fall onto like the Washington Monument, also killing terrorists. It was a really strange kind of side-scrolling shooting game, but really quite cool. It's cool to see like different games like this, such as one which I forget the name of next door, which was kind of an underwater submarine combat game. As you can see here, as my wife's playing, it's controlled looking through this viewfinder, which kind of zooms in on the screen. This one was really difficult as you had a finite amount of ammunition, but it's really cool. It's cool how they kind of have different arcades controlled in these strange, weird, wacky manners. One of my favourites and all-time great shoot-'em-up games is definitely R-Type, so it's really cool to see this upright arcade cabinet. Put a decent amount of time into this one and kind of forget how hard these games truly are, especially at the start when you get those few early upgrades. But yeah, this is definitely one of my all-time favourite games and one I really enjoyed back in the day. This was a bit of a strange one. It may look like Donkey Kong, but it's in fact Crazy Kong. Very similar premise, but cool machine nonetheless. We shouldn't be mean to old arcade machines, but they are not all created equally. As you can see with this Pac-Land game, this was truly awful. Just proves that everything Atari touches isn't gold. First of all, I must say, this must have been the loudest machine in the entire arcade. Marvel vs Street Fighter. So this was the first of the arcade fighting games we went on to. And I think we can all agree the best way to play any fighting game is in multiplayer in the arcades with a few friends using those classic fight sticks. Even though I may be terrible at fighting games, these are my favourite kinds. Even though I must admit I am one of those kind of players that do spam the buttons. But this one was really good fun. We had quite a few rounds on this with winner stays on. Some other fighting machines, we had this one which I cannot pronounce. I remember this game was also released on the PlayStation 1. It was the weird kind of game that had Final Fantasy fighting characters. It was a bit weird. It was kind of cool though. It's good to see it in an arcade rather than on the PlayStation 1. And of course, when we talk about fighting games in the arcade, how can we forget? And they had Tekken and Tekken 3. I think Tekken 3 is definitely one of my favourite fighting games, so it's cool to see this in the arcade. If you've watched the channel for a while, you know I'm all about the wrestling games. So I managed to find two in the arcade. First one being WWF Superstars, and this had an amazing roster of kind of the late 80s, early 90s wrestlers. But there was not one but two arcade machines from the WWF period. The second is one of my favourites of all time, and that is the WrestleMania arcade machine. This one kind of looks like Mortal Kombat being made by the same people. I really like how they kind of 3D modelled the characters and put them against the 2D background. This is definitely one I want to play more of. I want to either get it for the Saturn or the PlayStation 1, but the arcade is definitely where it's at if you want to play the best experience of this game. One of the really cool things about Retro Replay is its bar lounge area, where you can kind of kick back and play some console games in between playing the arcade games. So I always have some time to jump on some Mario Kart and have a couple of rounds on here. We all know it is one of the greatest racing games of all time, and it's really nice to meet up with some friends, play a couple of rounds while having a couple of rounds, if you know what I mean. This is a cool area to chill out and just give those wrists a little bit of a rest for the arcade machines, and it also had this really awesome Xbox 360 shop display in the corner. I remember being to shops and playing these back in the day. It was an awesome way to see what consoles and games were coming up to try them firsthand. Once we had had a few refreshments, it was on to my favourite genre of arcade machines, the light gun games. And what better place to start than with Time Crisis 2, arguably one of the best light gun games of all time. Kind of why we were doing this challenge was to see who could get through the game using as little credits as possible. I think we managed to get through it with literally one go. So even though we could have had many goes through, we managed to get through it on just that one credit. But oh, the hours I put to this machine, I really should be able to complete it with just one credit. Can't really talk about light gun games without talking about Point Blank, one of my favourite multiplayer arcade games. I really got a little bit competitive on this one, but I have put a lot of time in practicing, and it's always good to show off the craft. mentioned in previous videos that I'm a massive fan of the original Operation Wolf, but I did not realise there was a sequel, let alone a third game in the trilogy. This one was really cool as you had a massive machine gun to shoot with. It vibrated, it was incredibly overkill, there was so many enemies, it was so over the top, it was a really good two-player arcade game. I just wanted to share this little bit of gameplay from Operation Wolf here because it is absolutely insane. You are spending rounds by the millions per second, but there's so much going on. This one really was one that absolutely blitzed the senses. Arguably my favourite light gun game of all time, and one of the main reasons we came to Retro Replay was to play House of the Dead 3. They also had a machine of House of the Dead right next door. How awesome is that? That is two machines you need in your life right next to each other. But the thing is with this one, those shotguns are super heavy. We were taking it in turns because your arms got tired using those shotguns. It was actually quite strange because me and my wife were playing this at home on the Xbox the night before, but that version just does not contend with the arcade version. The arcade version, like so many arcade versions of games, absolutely blows it away. This machine is big as well, and I just can't get over the weight of these shotguns, but it's just the fact you can pump the shotguns, it just makes it so much more immersive. I think, hand on heart, this is probably my favourite House of the Dead game, even though I did play an incredible amount of House of the Dead 2. The first one is always a classic, and House of the Dead 4 with the Uzi is just a bit silly. This one kind of, I think, treads the line of having a cool weapon while also not being too over the top of having the Uzi. It is a fun arcade game and one of my favourite ones of all time. Another arcade machine which is way better in the arcades than on the home ports is Area 51. Even though the janky animation of the people is laughable these day and age. I think I seem to remember having this one at a local swimming pool I used to go to when I was younger, which is really quite random. I think it was this and Sega Rally, but yeah, it's a classic in my eyes. Because it was free to play all the arcade machines, it would be rude not to go guns akimbo and dual wield, even though we all know this doesn't really work out, even though you do look absolutely gangster playing this way. The final light gun game I want to talk about is this one. It is really strange. It's called Gunslinger Stratos. And I didn't really know what was going on a lot of the time, but the graphics on this were absolutely amazing. I actually thought this was a modern arcade machine, even though it's actually from back in 2011 upon looking on Wikipedia. So you notice at the start of the video it showed you it was not a two-player game, but it had two guns. That's because the guns could kind of slot together. It was really peculiar. I wasn't sure if it was kind of like an online arena fighting game. I should add, everything in this game was in Japanese, so I didn't have a great deal of idea what was going on. But this one was really cool. It was kind of like, imagine a battle royale with light guns, I presume. As the night was getting later, we started to feel the need for speed, so we were moving on to racing games. This one was really odd. It was like a Japanese racing game that was just set on like the motorway, but seriously, there was just some bits where you just held the car straight for 5 or 10 minutes go. It was really odd. But yeah, they had a really good selection of racing games. I'm going to show you a few of my favourites in the next few bits. Need for Speed Underground is one of my favourite racing games on the original Xbox, but little did I know they actually had an arcade version of it. So you could play this one in two-player, and it was like a better version of the console port. It even had all the music. It was really good. It was pretty hard, especially with trying to drift around those corners. But yeah, it's a shame this one couldn't have been louder because we all know the soundtrack for this game is absolutely god tier. But yeah, this was a quality version of this game. This machine right here was my highlight of the night and one that really took me by surprise. So I don't know if you played Hydro Thunder back in the days, but the console ports absolutely pale in comparison to this in the arcades. The sense of speed is blinding, the controls are so tight, and the AI in it is fantastic. There's no rubber banding, but it just feels like you are there in the race. This one is one of the biggest surprise arcade games I've played for ages, and do you know what? I think it's actually gone into my top 10 favourite arcade games now of all time. By this time we were all starting to feel the effects of those earlier drinks, but it is always time to smash out some Guitar Hero, a game which I believe arguably gets better with a little bit of liquid lubrication. And yeah, this one is one again that is much better in the arcades, even though the guitars are really heavy again in the arcades, but I guess they do take more of a beating being used by the public every day. Arcades aren't just about flashing lights and LCD screens. You can have just as much fun and get very competitive with these top table foosball games. This one did get very competitive though. We heard some people in the back room playing it earlier and they got super loud. But yeah, this is a one that's a classic all the time, especially after a couple of drinks. It was getting later into the night, but there were still some machines we wanted to try out. The first of which was this 4-player Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles machine. How awesome is it for 4 people to crowd around one of these machines and just look at the artwork on this thing. This thing is absolutely beautiful. I have seen the arcade 1-up version that looks very similar. I'd love to add this into the collection. This Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles arcade machine is the absolute definition of chaos when you have 4 players crowded around it. There was so much going on. It was so hard to keep track of what was going on. But this is a game that is just head and shoulders better in the arcades. It was absolutely chaos and we absolutely loved it. Speaking of 4-player arcade action, there is only one game we could finish our night off with, and that is the Simpsons arcade machine. This one is literally the definition of wrist wrecker. My arms and fingers and wrist were absolutely destroyed after playing this. But for me, this is the definition of 4-player perfection in the arcades. This is for me what the arcades are all about. Gathering your friends, huddling around a machine, just chucking in as much money as possible and smashing it out. This was the end of a fantastic evening. So I thought that was the end of the night, but I had had a few drinks and I was drunkenly convinced to have a go at the dance stage game. This is a genre of game I am not very good at, I am not very experienced with, I am not a dancer, I am more of a fighter or a game player. But yeah, I gave it a go, and at the end of the day, the arcades are all about letting loose and having fun. And after the most recent years, it is good to just be out, having fun with your friends. That's what it's all about, regardless of how stupid you look doing it. This really was an amazing night out with friends, and I definitely recommend Retro Replay. It is worth the trip. I hope you enjoyed the first of these retro road trip videos. Remember to like this video and subscribe for more great gaming content, and as always, keep playing the game. See y'all soon.